Hello and welcome to the TGH College Hardwood podcast. I am Joe. With me is Greg, as always. Here to talk about some college basketball going on. There was some news. There was some weird results, as has been the case a lot of times with this college basketball season. Not a lot of games being played, but we're slowly getting into the thick of conference play. Greg, how are you doing?
Excellent. Happy New Year to everyone. Hope everyone had some, a nice celebration. We got to watch. Obviously, this isn't what we're going to podcast about, but we got to watch a couple of um, good games in college football yesterday. I jokingly texted in our group text with me and Joe and some friends that I was so bored and I was going to sleep, and he did not. He did not take very well to that. He sent me back some not very nice things. So, Joe, I guess this is my official apology. I didn't mean to make. I was making a joke, but man, you were really into college football yesterday.
So sometimes when you're a person who covers these sports and a lot of stuff's going on and you're trying to track your tweets and what you're supposed to be jotting down on our notepads and everything else, and you get a text about what he should be reading, yeah, you send some profanity laced things back. It was a joke that in different times I'd find funny, but just not then. But no, it's all good. We got some college football playoff, some results that were interesting. We had Alabama and Michigan. Both those basketball programs are kind of the last couple of years actually been pretty good, but historically not as good as some other ones. And then Washington and Texas, not a bigger, not a lot of history basketball wise, but it's always fun to see schools do different things in different sports, and that college football playoff is expanding to 12. I use this opportunity to say, please don't expand the NCAA tournament. That would be the worst thing possible. Please don't do that. That's all we can ask for. We know everyone wants all about the grabbing money and everything. That's the only reason why they're expanding the playoff. It's a guys, that they don't want to. It's a guy. We're gonna let everyone try to compete for a title. No, it's just the executives want more money. So that's why they're going to do that. But again, that's a tangent. But let's keep it the same with NCAA tournament. Let's make sure we keep it what it is. It's great how it is, and it shouldn't be changed for the foreseeable future. Let's start off with some news that is not so good for Illinois basketball and Terrence Shannon. He is currently allegedly dealing with a rape case that is going on. It stems from Lawrence, Kansas. It actually is from a point where Terrence Shannon was a fan at Illinois versus Kansas's football game in Kansas, where he traveled to watch the game play. Currently, he is not with the team. Now, he's going to have to go through the process here. He did willingly go to Lawrence, Kansas, and deal with the authorities there. So they're going to be without him for the time. So that's obviously nothing we want to see. But we have to talk about basketball on the show, Greg. And that is a huge, huge blow to Illinois, who he's their leading scorer. He's shooting over 50% from the field. He was looking like the All-American that I thought he was going to be this year. Even if he it gets cleared and comes back, there's a huge portion of the Big Ten schedule that he's likely going to miss, and that's going to be huge for this team that had Big Ten title aspirations. I'm sure had dreams of making a Final Four. How realistic that is, I don't know, but that's all kind of put on the back burner now.
This just it came out of absolutely nowhere. I don't remember the exact date of the game. I think it was early December. The game that Joe mentioned, the Illinois Kansas game. I don't know if it was a bowl game or what if it was just I can't remember off the top of my head, but I know that I've seen the date mentioned, and like Joe mentioned, Terrence Shannon traveled to Lawrence, Kansas, turned himself in. So we're not going to make any speculation on the case. I mean, that's not what we're here to do. We're here to talk about basketball, and this is just I in recent memory can't think of another story like this. The one that maybe captured, and I almost feel like this maybe didn't even reach that heightened level was the Alabama story with Brandon. Oh my goodness, now I'm blanking on his name.
Brandon Miller,
Um,
but not.
Brandon Miller.
Yeah, yeah.
But I feel like that one was it was all over the news, and it was because of how Alabama handled it. And obviously, in this case, we still Illinois. They go right to, and I've heard some people say that, hey, this is just school policy or whatever, but right to indefinitely suspended. So he's not with the team. Right before Big Ten play, they're about to play their first Big Ten game tonight. Of course, they played a game last week without him against Fairleigh Dickinson. handled them pretty well. So this is a wild player to lose. I mean, like this could happen to any team with injury. You just this is just a weird story again. Like I said, feels like it came out of nowhere. They got a game later this week that it just changes the outlook of it that we're gonna pick. So we can talk about that a little bit later. But in terms of this news, yeah, I mean you already said it all, Joe. I mean this is a team that just this week reaches top 10 in the AP poll. Of course, it doesn't mean all that much. It's just something our voters vote on. But I mean, like, that's a big deal seeing that number next to your school, for a lot of people. So it kind of gives us an idea of what's important to watch. And this is a wild one that I mean, I don't think either of us, Joe, had them as a title contender. But you mentioned Final Four. Yeah, I could see that, especially with the way Shannon's been playing and some of the transfers that they have and whatnot. And uh, now, I mean, like, obviously we'll see, but just on roster alone, I mean, they got to be taking about a 2-tier step down.
I'm with you. I don't know what this team is. I don't know if you can replace 20 points per game that easily, and a guy who does a little bit of everything. Like, there's going to be more attention that's is shown to Damask. I think that could be a problem. This team's going from in 10th in the AP poll, top 10 in the AP poll, to now maybe having to gut out some wins in the Big Ten. Could they fall all the way to the bubble at this point? Yeah, they really could, and that's really disappointing. And the committee does take stuff like this into consideration. Obviously, we've seen it with Kenyon Martin in Cincinnati when they should have been a 1 seed in the tournament. He ends up breaking his leg, and then they move him down to a 2 seed. Cincinnati all those years ago. I think the year was like 2000, 2001 maybe. But that's just they do that type of stuff all the time. So hopefully this thing gets sorted out, and all the parties who are wrong can be righted in some sort of way in the future. That's all we can hope for. But in the foreseeable future, yeah, the Big Ten does have a kind of been thrown for a loop here. Purdue may be getting a little bit extra chances here to get stuff done. Now, Greg, we mentioned last week was not that big of a week. It's obviously the holidays. We're getting more into a regular schedule coming up here. So we didn't have anything from early last week all the way through Thursday. The games we wanted to talk about, we did talk about, started on Friday last week. We had San Diego State beating Gonzaga. This one was a little bit surprising. Now, we mentioned Gonzaga's issues in the last couple of podcasts. We've talked about some of the stuff that has gone wrong for them. But San Diego State deserves a lot of credit here, too. Reese Dixon Waters, you might formerly know him as, had 22 points in this game. We had Jaden Ledee had 20 points in this game as well on the inside. They have good scoring. They have probably better scoring than last year. They have some decent depth. And while I do have those same issues with Gonzaga, we've talked about them a whole lot more than we talked about San Diego State. So what I will say about San Diego State is they seem like they have more of a scoring punch than last year. And this team might be better than their team last year who made the national championship game, albeit they may not actually make it that far. It's just how the season goes. But they have I think they have like a little bit more upside this year than last year, which is crazy. And it may mean if the tournament doesn't get crazy, then they don't make it past the Sweet 16. But, it's just how things go in the tournament.
Yeah, Joe. I mean, you already mentioned kind of the dichotomy, the disparity in depth between these two teams. The only players' names that you really didn't mention, Darian Trammell came off the bench, and he came into this game pretty early. I can't remember if it was around the under 16 or around the under 12, but man, he started off hot. That was the first thing I wrote down. Was this dude was just, I mean, he was hitting shots, finishes nearly 50% from the field at 7 for 13 and 3 of 7 from 3 points. So finished with 17 points. Pretty darn good game for him. On top of it, so they were very close to having 3 guys score 20 points, and they got really good bench production between him and Miles Bird, and Lamont Butler's a starter, and they have these guys that are in the starting lineup that can score that didn't in this game. So, this team obviously has been through it. They got a couple of losses on their slate. I don't have their schedule in front of me, but it's one of those things where it's like we want to give them credit for beating Gonzaga, but at the same time, it stinks because any other year, this win would be, this would be a staple win especially for a team, in a conference like the Mountain West. But Joe, I would have to think at this point they might get a better win in conference with some of the teams. If they're able to pull off an upset against some of the other teams, you start thinking, Colorado State, New Mexico, Utah State. I'm thinking of those games, especially if they were on the road. Those games might end up being a higher quadrant in this one. We'll just have to see how Gonzaga finishes out the year. I am just thinking Gonzaga's schedule is going to be fluffed up with all of this WCC stuff. There's nothing with St. Mary's being what they are. So I don't know. Maybe you have a different opinion, but I worry about Gonzaga at this point, man. I just there's nothing in the WCC with St. Mary's being down. Of course, I'll own that. Saying that I thought they were going to be good this year, and maybe they can turn something on. But Joe, what are your thoughts on this game?
I think it's going to be a quadrant one win the whole way through. This is on the road, so I don't know if they'll have a better win, but it's not going to mean anything because I really don't think they look at specific wins as a committee as much as people might think. So when at the end of the day, when they have a quad one win on their schedule, that's all that'll matter. They can get more quad one wins in the Mountain West. We've talked about that. The formula is if you're on the road and it's the top 75 team in the net, that's a quadrant one win. So it could be 74, and it could be someone who's not very good, comparatively, obviously, and you can get that win. So they could have a couple more opportunities here. But like I said, I think I'm still Gonzaga. I think we'll be able to get the job done. The lack of depth is concerning. I think they can win the WCC. I don't think there's many major threats in that conference. I think they can be a decent seed in this NCAA tournament upcoming. One injury could change that. That's very scary. But for San Diego State, I think they could win the Mountain West. I think they could get a higher seed. They're 2 losses on the year. I don't have it in front of me right now, but I believe we're to BYU, who's looking a lot better than we originally anticipated. And then at Grand Canyon, not the greatest loss, but it is a tough environment. If anyone's ever seen
That team
videos,
Joe, that team only has 1 loss, I believe, this year as well, Grand Canyon. So again, I don't. Neither you or I have their schedule, but just important to mention.
mm-hmm.
We're looking at a team that's only got 2 losses, and both of them are to teams that, at least in terms of appearance, might have something going.
Yeah, for sure. It's everyone has a bad loss this year. We're gonna get to a team that has 2 bad losses, 2 coming up. So it's gonna be wild to see how this all sorts out. It'll end up being maybe a time where the bubble is. I say this every year, but the bubble seems weak. It's just how it's gonna be with how many losses we have with some of these teams. But yeah, I think both these teams, have some optimism for the future, and I think San Diego State can really put some things together in the Mountain West. The other game on Friday, we have Washington and Colorado. This was a game where I think we basically talked about it because there wasn't much going on. It was a conference game. Colorado gets the win here. KJ Simpson has a pretty big game with 21 points. I think 10 rebounds and 7 assists. Don't have it in front of me right now, Greg, as it's taken a while to pull up, but I believe that's what the stat line was. And this is big. I mean, Washington has some ups and downs this year. I don't know if they'll end up making the tournament. But Colorado is making a push towards the top 25 again. They have Cody Williams, their freshman, is starting to figure some things out. It looks encouraging for Colorado, a team that Greg, you were high on to start the year.
Yeah, and Joe, you mentioned Cody Williams. He didn't play in this game. Tristan Da Silva didn't play in this game. And yes, this was a home game. But this is a good win for Colorado. I think you and I both like this Washington team as maybe a team that sneaks into the tournament. Maybe looking at a very very far off seed, maybe an 11 seed going to Dayton or something like that. Or at least I think they're good enough for that. It's just are they going to be able to string together the wins? So yes, this was a road game, but Colorado without 2 of their top 5 players, but that entire Colorado team, the starters, scoring double figures. And normally you might look at the box score and say, man, they only got two points off their bench. But again, we just said, no Tristan Da Silva, no Cody Williams. So in context, that maybe makes it look a little bit different. They had to go deeper into their rotation than they normally would. It's still a good Washington team. It's a fun team. 8-4. It's just a team worth keeping an eye on. Joey, we touched on this a little bit earlier this year, but Mike Hawkins still coaching out there. If they don't make the tournament this year, do you think he's done? I think they're going to be, but it's really too early to start talking about who's going to be on the bubble and who's not going to be on the bubble. But they look like they're in that range of in versus out of the tournament. Might come down to a couple of wins for them. So what are you thinking?
I think he would have to make the tournament to save his job. Yes, I think that's what I thought coming in. I don't think anything's changed. This is a Pac-12 that looks a little light. We'll say. I mean, Arizona is obviously, we're going to talk about them in a little bit here, is having their struggles. You know, we have USC and UCLA not being as good as they're projected. They should make the tournament this year. If they're going to make the tournament based on the talent on their roster, they should make the tournament. I don't know if they will make the tournament. It's just one of those things where you don't know if you can trust them. And if they don't, with everything setting up this year for them to have a chance to maybe compete in the Pac 12, then yeah, I think it's time to move on, especially you're making a transition to the Big Ten. Maybe you can recruit some players in some different areas that you haven't normally recruited, although Seattle is a very good recruiting ground by itself. I think it's time to move on if you don't make a tournament. All right, so we'll move on to Saturday, Greg. We had Creighton at Marquette. Marquette wins this one 72-67. Tyler Kolek, 15 points, 8 assists, and 3 steals in this one. Came away, with the same thing I talked about last week, Greg. It's just tough to win on the road in the Big East is number one. Number two, Marquette looks like a team that I'll have a lot of faith with in the regular season, and we'll see how they do in the postseason. It's more of a seeing and believing thing or a matchup thing before we can really pick them to go very far. And then number three, I think Creighton's not going to be very good this year. I don't know. I mean, obviously Nemhard transferring out was tough. I don't think Ashworth has been the answer. He had a really rough game in this one. He's had a really rough start to the season. I think it's going to hold them back, especially because they're not a team that has tons and tons of depth either. So Creighton's a team I was pretty high on to start the year. I'm moving towards being out on them in terms of maybe even making a second weekend.
Yeah, Joe, they have what you would think is, I mean, a pretty decent game this week. I want to say it was I put the list together of games that Joe and I pick. I didn't even put this on our list. They're playing Providence in Omaha, and I just I'm with you on this. They're off my radar for now. There's going to be plenty of chances playing in the Big East. They're going to get plenty of good games. They win this game, and maybe they start coming back into our view here. But I saw that game and I just said, right now, what have we seen from Creighton? I mean, I heard someone say this week that this sounds like, how we talked about earlier in the year, how it seems like the Carolina transfer of Caleb Love going away, and it seems like it kind of was working out for both parties. Caleb Love, of course, Arizona has their struggles, and Carolina's lost a couple of games, but it for the most part, by and large, looked like maybe, hey, this may work out for both parties. You want to look at the Ryan Nemhard thing in Creighton, that almost seems like the opposite. Ryan Nemhard's on Creighton, I'm sorry, Ryan Nemhard's on Gonzaga, and they don't look like they're what they usually are, although he's one of the better players on that team. Creighton looks like they're struggling. They have depth issues and whatnot, but I think they could have really benefited, even if we were still sitting here saying, man, this team is good, but they don't have depth. Ryan Nemhard, I think, might have been that difference for them. It's always going to be a what if. But again, they had a game this week that otherwise, if you just slapped this on us preseason, we'd have been targeting this game saying, man, this is probably going to be one you want to watch. And for now, I'm just like, it's Providence game to lose. I know it's on the road in the Big East, like you said, Joe, but I didn't even put it on our list of games to pick just because of what's been going on with Creighton.
Yeah, and with the transfers too, we talked about Ashworth maybe being like a key, but honestly, I think maybe we thought like, hey, he feels a need. Let's overanalyze this, because sometimes when you move from the Mountain West over to the Big East, you're moving from a decent conference, albeit to the Big East with Creighton, where they've played a tough non-conference schedule too. It's not going to work out. So Stephen Ashworth has not worked out. I'm not going to say it's all his fault this is going down. I think they scrambled after Nemhard left, and they got Ashworth. Ashworth was a solid player. It's not a wrong decision. It just hasn't worked out. So while transfer portal, sometimes you like what you're getting over some freshmen, it doesn't always work out either. So I'm with you. I think sometimes we overanalyze or have all these rosters built up in our head of this team has this many transfers. But in all reality, I think it still needs to be a blend of possible transfers, returning players, and recruits all together to get some wins, because we've seen teams that are made up of all transfers maybe struggle, like Arkansas last year, although they did make it further in the tournament than they were projected. all these transfers coming in. Sometimes it's hard to put them all together. Sometimes guys don't live up to the hype. So I think the transfer portal is good for players. I think for teams, it's just something you have to manage a lot better rather than just, oh, we lost a point guard, let's insert a point guard and then we'll be fine. This just doesn't work that way. All right, so next one up, we have Virginia and Notre Dame. Greg, I think we had mentioned maybe last week or the week before just that Virginia is a tough team to figure out. I know I've been out on them for a while. I don't know how you feel. I don't remember what you mentioned, but they lost to a Notre Dame team that is not very good, 76-54. Now they're a team that's going to live by playing tough defense, and they're going to give up scoring a lot of points, but they're 10-3. They were ranked at some point, like before Memphis game. I know we picked that game. I'm out. I don't care if they make the tournament. I'm not picking them to win a game. I don't care who they play. I don't care if they play a 16 seed again. I'm out. I'm not picking them at all.
This is just a weird team because they were kind of out of sight, out of mind, and then they had that Texas A&M win, and since then they've got annihilated by Memphis. They didn't have a very good showing against Wisconsin, but that was before the Texas A&M game. Now they lose this game. This Notre Dame team is not good. They weren't supposed to be good. They're definitely not good. This is okay. It's at Notre Dame, but still, this is not. I mean, they don't have any really good wins outside of the Texas A&M win. This is a weird team. I think that's the thing that just tipped me off when I saw this result. I was like, man, a couple weeks ago, this team was in the top 25. Sure, they were in the back end, but I mean, this loss just, you're right. Unless they go on some big streak in the ACC, like I'm not even going to be paying attention to this team's who they're playing until they give me a reason to, because what they've shown me at this point is that they are not worth paying attention to. And you're right. Maybe the ACC is light enough, or maybe they pick up a couple of key wins here and there to, sneak in an at-large resume as, I don't know, like a weird 8 or a 9 seed. But yeah, I'm with you, man. Like they're just so unpredictable. I don't want to. I wouldn't want to touch them with a 30-foot pole right now.
And a reminder, Texas A&M was not fully healthy in that game. I believe Tyrese Radford was
Good point.
out, and I think was Coleman. I think was banged up. I think he played in the game. He was banged up. So
yes, that was when they were going through the period where there was a couple of games where Texas A&M played without both Radford and Coleman. I think you're right. My recollection tells me that Coleman played in that game, but wasn't 100%. So I'm positive with you that Tyrese Radford did not play in that game. So it goes as a win on their resume, and like that's the kind of thing that might float them into the tournament. But I'm with you. I mean, this is a team that I'm with you, unless they're playing another team like this, which I guess if they're ended up on the 8-9 line, they might be against another team. Then I'm like, man, I don't know what to do with that team. But this is one I'm with you, man. I'm just out on them.
yeah, they can pick teams off. Like Texas A&M, I know Wade Taylor had a bad day shooting. I think he was 2 of 10 that game. That's like they can pick teams off like that. But if they play teams that they're familiar with, I think it could cause problems. If they play teams that, I mean, honestly, I think if Texas A&M's fully healthy, they win that game going away. But that's a different story. So I don't know what to think. They did beat Syracuse too. I don't know. Syracuse didn't really beat anyone in the non-conference, but all their losses were good. I think their best win was Oregon. So we're going to find out more about Syracuse this week with the ACC play starting up. But yeah, I'm out on Virginia. If they make the tournament somehow, I'm picking against them. I'll let you know that now. Unless the other team is just a version of Virginia that is worse than them, it means all defense, no offense. It's just not worth even tracking or talking about until they can prove it. Next one up, we had the 1979 National Championship rematch, albeit how many years later? I'm not doing that math still. We had Michigan State and Indiana. Michigan State and Indiana State. It'd be interesting if it was Michigan State and Indiana in a championship. Michigan State wins this one, and Greg, I don't even want to talk about the game or Michigan State right now because Michigan State has been playing better, but other people in the media are taking this like Michigan State is the greatest thing ever. And I just don't understand. The resume is not that good. This is a solid win over Indiana State, who's, probably going to be like a decent win. But obviously they're going into the Big Ten where they're going to play a lot of teams that are going to be at least quadrant 1 or quadrant 2 wins or teams, however you want to phrase it. I need to see it to believe it. I can't just be like, hey, oh, let's put them in the top 25 after they have already so many losses, and just because the team that beat them is in the top 25, that's how it works. Like, what are we supposed to retroactively penalize James Madison and take them out of the rankings, or are we supposed to put Michigan State in the rankings? It just doesn't make any sense to be high on them. You could think that they could figure it out, but right now, being as high as some of the people in the media are on them is just crazy.
Yeah, I know Joe and I had seen that someone was talking about why is Michigan State being penalized for certain wins or losses or whatever. Their one and only quad one win is Baylor, and yeah, they obliterated Baylor, and that's a great win. That's the kind of thing that might you know you think might start a little bit of a roll for them. This is another decent win. It's Indiana State is 31st in the net right now, so because it was a home game, that like sits right on the border between a quad one and a quad two. I think it'll ultimately probably end up being a quad two win for them. I don't think Indiana State's going to be top 30 in the net come later. It maybe not. This was just on my radar. Joe and I didn't even necessarily pick this game. This was just on my radar because two teams with double digit wins and well, no, not Michigan State, but Michigan State going up against a team with double digit wins and only one or two losses on the year. They gotta capture every opportunity. When Joe and I talked about them a couple weeks ago after they I think they dropped the Nebraska game, we just said, man, what are they going to have to do? Go 15-5 or 14-6 in the Big Ten to be a tournament team. They need every little win like this, man. It may not look like much, but they are Sycamore fans for the rest of the year. They hope that Indiana State goes and wins the Missouri Valley, and they hope that this looks like a great. They're going to get better opportunities in the Big Ten to get some wins, but they just need everything they can collect at this point because this is a team that you and I both probably had as a second weekend team. A lot of people were picking them to go to the Final Four. I probably had them in the top five, and it was just all based on this projection of, all right, here's what they're bringing back, and they're adding some of these freshmen, and they just don't seem like the same team. It's weird, but there's a lot different, and we're just still at that point where we're just giving it like, all right, Izzo will figure it out. Izzo will figure it out, and maybe he will, but we're about to get to that meat of the Big Ten schedule here, man, and just we're really gonna find out who they are because if they flip back and forth and this team is 10-10 or whatever 9-11 in the Big Ten, they are not a tournament team. They're gonna have to have a really good record to do that. I don't care how good the Big Ten is.
I'm with you. We can say since that Nebraska game, they have taken care of business, 4 straight wins. Again, one of those over Baylor, but I'm starting to question how good Baylor is too. It's something we had noted, I believe, last week, or maybe the week before. But it's Baylor is a team that doesn't play good defense anymore, and I don't know how they're going to fare in the Big 12. There are some, I would say, more gimme games in the new Big 12 than there have been in the past, but there's also a lot of good teams. So they're a team that went from top 10 team to now I think they're 18th in the latest poll to maybe closer to the bubble by the time things get crazy. We just have to see how they respond to the Big 12 schedule. And if that's one of your biggest wins, that's concerning because you are already 0-2 in conference play with losses to Wisconsin and at Nebraska. Your next game this week that you have is Penn State, so you should win that one. And then you have to start building back, and you have at Illinois as your next game after that, which again is a little bit different with Terrence Shannon likely going to miss that game, but you've lost some games that you probably shouldn't have lost anyway. So if you drop a couple more of those, it's over. So Michigan State just don't understand the hype more so than even the game. Good for them to get the win. Good for teams to schedule these type of games to remember some of the historic games in history. Even if it's not the most memorable championship, I think we'd all love seeing some UK played Utah in 1998. That'd be a really cool game to have on the non-conference schedule, in 2023 as a 25-year anniversary game or something like that. That should be something that people work on some of these, events that they have, is having some stuff like that going on. All right, so Florida Atlantic is the team I mentioned earlier that now has 2 really bad losses on the season. They dropped a game to Florida Gulf Coast. Now that is 2 quadrant 4 losses right now, I believe, or at least going to be, is what the projections say. It's getting time to start talking about how this team will be. Like, at times they have shown they can beat anyone in the country. obviously have the win over Arizona. How much does that mean anymore? I don't know, but it's a team that can play with the best of the best, but they're also suffering from when they play a team they should beat. They're starting to play down to the level of competition, and I don't know how many at-large bids there are for teams who have two quadrant four losses. I'm not sure there ever has been a bid that's gone to a team with two quadrant four losses. So if they don't win the AAC against Memphis, especially with their strength of schedule not going to be the greatest not through conference play, this team could be in some danger, Greg.
Well, currently they're sitting at 18th in the net, and that's something I need someone to explain to me. They have two quadrant four losses, probably one of the only teams that we're looking at in the top 25 right now that can say that. I guess what's floating them is the Arizona win, the Texas A&M win. They had a close-ish result with Illinois that we talked about a couple weeks ago. They've beaten Butler. I just like props to them for going out and Joe and I already mentioned this in previous. Props to them for going out and uh, making a little bit of a tougher non-conference schedule. But man, we're going to give credit where credit is due, but we're also going to lay blame where it's you can't lose these games. You're a Final Four team last year, coming in with all these expectations. I kind of said after the Bryant game to someone like, oh man, Dusty May loves this. It's bulletin board material. We're underdogs again. Now you got two of these. Now you're right. It spells trouble. But in terms of the numbers, the numbers don't say that. I don't understand how some of this stuff works. I know they wait a while to we wait a couple of weeks to let out the first net rankings, but I don't understand how a team can be that high unless it's literally just that Arizona win that's floating them. But I don't know if you're like saying you're worried about them making the tournament or what, but I would be less worried about this team making the tournament than Gonzaga because just because of what's in their conference. Now, they're not largely different. There's not a whole host of extra opportunities, but FAU has Memphis. So that's going to be at least two quad one opportunities. Maybe someone else is going to shine through in the American this year. We'll see. They obviously would have benefited if they still had Cincinnati, Houston, UCF, stuff like that, but they're in the Big 12 now. I personally, this is just my opinion, I'd be more worried about Gonzaga, who currently sits, I just looked, they sit at 57th in the net. I'd be more worried about them than this team. Do I think this team is better than Gonzaga? Like in terms of personnel? No, I'd probably take Gonzaga if these two teams were to play, but just in terms of what these numbers are telling us, you got to be, in my opinion, you got to be more worried about Gonzaga at the moment.
Disagree. I think the net right now is still messed up from all the non-conference games and the margins of defeat that we're seeing that honestly are really screwing with things as we've talked about. But Gonzaga is 0-4 in quad one, otherwise undefeated. So they're not going to have the quad one wins, but they're also, I think, much better than anyone else in their conference. FAU, they have those opportunities against Memphis. I'm not sure they're going to win those games. If I had to pick right now, I'm taking Memphis in whatever game if they're playing. I don't know what the schedule looks like if they're playing them at there or whatever. They're of the top 22 net teams. There is not anyone else who has a quad 3 or quad 4 loss. You start going down, and then like Kentucky has a quad 3 loss, and then Villanova has 2 quad 3 losses. They're 23rd and 26th in the net. Once you get closer to 30, that's when you're getting closer to the bubble. If they drop a couple games in the American, because it's obviously something that they're prone to do is dropping games they shouldn't drop. I think they're getting closer and closer to the bubble. These wins over some of the good teams save them, but I just don't. 2 quad 4 losses are something that's very tough to overcome. And if they start having some of these other ones fall against them, I'm pretty concerned. I don't know, but it's definitely interesting tracking both of these mid-major teams who don't have the conference quality that we thought they would, at least for the AAC with teams leaving, and for Gonzaga just with St. Mary's, as you said, just not being as good as we thought they were going to be either.
The only, and I already said it, but thank God they scheduled the way they did in their out of conference, because if they didn't, this would be a whole different conversation. If they don't have the Arizona and Texas A&M wins right now, this is probably not like, we're probably just kicking this team to the road and saying, "Yep, guess last year was a fluke." At least they have those things that I guess for the moment are keeping them afloat.
Let me do a little bit of a blind resume, but it's not blind resume because you know who Florida Atlantic, you know the resume now. Would you take a team that is, as Florida Atlantic is, 2-1 in quadrant one, and then 2-2 in quadrant four, and then everything else they've won? Or would you take a team who's, let's find one that's a little bit different in the net, that is 1-1 in quadrant one and then undefeated otherwise? Because the only thing that separates them is just one extra quadrant one win.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be inclined to go with option B there.
That is South Carolina. They are 45th in the net right now. So I think you're going to be competing against teams that aren't even in. You know what I mean? You're not.
Someone needs to explain to me how this thing works. I really don't. I really
so
just don't
so
get it.
so check this out. Providence 2-1 in quadrant one, 1-1 in quadrant two, and then undefeated otherwise. Like, I would probably take Providence's resume than over Florida Atlantic's, even though they have a losing record against quadrant one and Florida Atlantic is a winning record slightly. It's just going to get so dicey down the stretch here. So it's, even teams like Miami, Florida, 0-2 quadrant one, and then undefeated the rest of the way. It's going to get crazy this year, man. And I just think these losses might add up. Hopefully, for their sake, they can find a rhythm. And I know they had some guys hurt before. Still not an excuse to lose to Bryant, but man, they might have to win 23 or 4 games just to make sure they're in contention to be in the tournament. I don't know. If you win 20, if you go 20 and 11 or whatever, that's going to be close. Probably out, honestly. All right, so we'll move into the next one, Greg. We have Sunday. We had Stanford and Arizona. Stanford pulls off the upset. They score 100 points too, 100-82. Caleb Love scores 23 for Arizona, but this is starting to get a little bit alarming for them. They're dropping in the polls now. They obviously beat Cal earlier in the week. Cal's not the greatest team over there, and they also didn't play their best game against Cal. And then they lose to Stanford, so they were up as high as 4, or even higher than that. Excuse me, they were 4 last week, and then they moved down to 10 this week. A team that we had thought with, up there with Purdue as one of the national title contenders, and now you're starting to think, what is going on with this team?
Joe, this is starting to scream to me that we're going to look up in the Final Four this year, and it's going to be 4 teams that were just like last year. We're going to be like, how did these teams get here? It just, I know UConn last year kind of went through that phase, especially once they got to the Big East, where they dropped a couple of games, and they were undefeated in the non-conference. I just there's no team that you start looking through polls or power rankings or whatever. There's really no team at the moment that I'm just looking at man, I'm betting my house on them winning, making the Final Four, whatever. I mean, there's some good teams, but they're just, no one's consistent right now. There's no juggernaut. And we thought that earlier in the year. There are some of these teams that we thought, man, this team is just going to steamroll the competition. We said that about UConn. We had that opinion about Arizona at one point in the year. We thought that about Purdue in preseason. But I guess what you could say about this year is every team is flawed, even the good ones. This kind of loss, it actually only goes down as a quad 2 for now. Who knows where Stanford ends up? 118 in the net now. So, even if that's a quad 3 loss, that's still not the worst thing in the world. They're going to have some decent opportunities, even as Joe mentioned, in a light Pac-12. But this is an oddball result for a team that, and we just got done talking about FAU. Well, they lost to FAU. So there's just some weird dots that connect this year. They lost to Purdue. I still think they're good. I don't think this is all of a sudden you're right. It's alarming. It's a game that you start to think, why'd they lose that one? And, we've been talking about Stanford for the past couple of years. They bring in talent. They don't really do anything with it. Jared Haas is probably on his way out. We'll see. But, it's just, maybe this is just going to turn out to be an anomaly. We say, everybody gets one. This is their only loss outside of quad 1, but I don't know, man. This is one that you texted me when it was happening, and I was just like, what? All right. I guess the only thing I can think of is, I guess it seems like the Pac-12 does that kind of 2 games in 3 days thing where they play Friday and then they play Sunday. I mean, like, that's the only plausible explanation I have for this. But Joe, as you and I have talked about off air, I mean, these guys are used to playing several games in a day on, their select team circuit, on their AAU circuit. So I don't even want to say it was that, but this is just a weird one. I really don't know. I'm glad we're doing a podcast where I can tell people what to think, because I don't know what to think about this. I really don't.
Well, that's what makes the sport great is that we've had more unpredictability, and honestly, even teams who get the star players have had season like I'm trying to think of like a time. The last time someone had 2012 Kentucky where they were 38-3 was a good season where they just kind of dominated from start to finish. But like one player was helping them pull them above the rest. Like maybe the 2015 Duke team had like all those freshmen too. The ones like none of them worked out in the pros, so it's kind of hard to like say that they were like that good, but they were that good. The freshmen collectively led them to a championship, but like it's been different. Zion Williamson's Duke team didn't get all that far. If I remember right, they didn't make the Final Four or anything. The NIL I think is in transfer portal has opened up more teams to be good, and the 3-point line continues to be used in a good way, and teams are using it better as time and time goes on. So it's been a game that's less focused about athleticism and more focused on skill. And I'll tell you what, there's more people who can shoot a 3-point shot that can dunk a basketball. So it's opened things up. It's going to be crazy. So yes, we don't know all the answers, and it is the craziest year that I can kind of remember in a while. But it also is what makes the sport great. So I actually kind of like when I'm wrong. It makes it more fun.
Yeah, Joe, just to bounce off that point a little bit, if it's 25 years ago, Zach Edey, first of all, he's not in school anymore.
Right.
He's in the NBA. He was the first pick in either last year's draft. I mean, you're absolutely right. The game has changed, and that's why we get some of these oddball results. Over a larger sample size, ideally, we get to know what teams are and what they aren't. But in a game like this, it's basketball. It's not quite like baseball where you're going to have 60 losses a year and still be a good team. But this is going to happen. There's just we're still talking about collegiate athletes. We're not talking about professionals. These guys, at least we think, still go to school and still go to class and still have other responsibilities. They're not going to be extremely consistent. And
Right.
as you've already said, the game itself has changed and is changing. So yeah, I mean this is what I love to watch, and just look on my phone and see they're beating them. I mean this is what makes this sport fun. You're absolutely right, because it's like a one in a trillion chance or whatever of picking a perfect bracket. Well, this year it feels like it's one in a quadrillion, because we're gonna get to March, and I feel like I've been watching more than I've ever even in past years, and I just am still gonna be looking at my bracket like, I don't know what to do with that team. I don't know what to do with that team. Did I really pick them to the Elite Eight? I don't think that's gonna happen. It's just strange.
Oh, absolutely. And you mentioned that like Zach Edey would be like the first overall pick 25 years ago, and then would not be in college. But like also this is like think about like from Steph Curry's best basketball player in the world, possibly at least maybe a couple of years ago. He's kind of slowing down a little bit, but he's probably like with how physical the game used to be. He's probably not in the league. He had a bunch of ankle issues early in his career. He probably someone knocks him out. That's just how the 80s and 90s NBA was, and then we've kind of graduated into a different era, and it makes it so for NBA maybe that there's like a superstar thing that you can kind of predict who's going to win championships, but for college basketball where it's a lot more up in the air with these college kids, as you said, it makes it more exciting. Anything can happen. I mean, I think I picked Alabama to win it all last year. Obviously didn't go that well. I was excited that we had different teams step up, and not that what I expected happened, but at the end of the day, if you're a fan of one of those top teams, you're probably scared. If you're a fan of a team who's like a 5 through 10 seed, like you're probably excited we can do this. And also, probably too, Greg, there's a reason why there's like the 16 seed never upset a 1 seed up until the last 7 or 8 years. I mean, it's happened a couple times now, but just the game's different at this point, which might be better for the sport. But also, don't expand the tournament because of that. Don't do that.
Just remember, Joe, when NIL started, we were told that the disparity between the little schools and the big schools was going to increase. And here we are sitting here seeing some of the most wild results we've ever seen. We saw our second 16-1 last year. So at least in practice. I mean, maybe some of these changes haven't hit full scale. Maybe we don't have a large enough sample size yet. But as the things are today, it looks like there's more competition. There's just more craziness out there. So it's not looking like all of a sudden the schools that are able to pay for players they're just running roughshod through the league. That's absolutely not what we're seeing. We're seeing the opposite.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's going to be a good thing for the sport. And as always, even if money's out there, let's not act like money wasn't being thrown around before. Let's not act like guys had missed recruits. I mean, John Morant was at Murray State for God's sakes a couple of years ago. So always guys who go to small schools who end up doing good things as well. Now that's our recap of last week. Greg, you had some teams worth mentioning that you wanted to go over as well before we get to our picks for the week.
Yeah, and I have these kind of in order of most worth mentioning to I'm sorry, least worth mentioning to most, whatever you least notable, most notable, whatever you want to say. Versus Wake Forest, Joe and I kind of mentioned when we were picking way back, what feels like 8 years ago, when we were picking our MTEs, our Thanksgiving tournaments and whatnot. I can't remember what tournament they were in, but I was looking at Wake Forest and I was like, okay, they got a little bit of an interesting roster, and come to find out, Demario Monsanto's not playing. Well, now this team, yeah, they're 64th in the net, but they're sitting at 9-3. He hasn't played a game yet. Hunter Salas looks great. So there's another thing that we're touching on Gonzaga all over the place. There's another thing I'm sure Gonzaga would love to have just to add another piece to their rotation. This is a team I think I can't remember the exact wording I said, but I think I said something. I wouldn't be surprised if all of a sudden you looked up in the middle of February and they were in contention to be, one of the top 5 teams in the ACC. So I still haven't seen exactly when Monsanto is coming back, but I thought I saw somebody say something about it. It sounds like he's getting close or something. So just a team where if there's nothing else on and you're seeing them play, maybe they're, I don't know what their schedule looks like. Maybe they're playing, Duke or Carolina or something in the next couple of weeks. So just a team worth watching. Mississippi State, we did talk about them earlier in the year. They had some weird losses. I think it was like Southern and Georgia Tech in the same week, and it was like that is strange. But they haven't lost since that. That was pretty early on in the year. Now they're sitting at 11-2. Tolu Smith is back. That was a name that Joe and I mentioned. I know he probably would have been on. I don't remember if he actually ended up on like a preseason all SEC team or if he was already hurt at the time, so he didn't get voted on. But we had said preseason he was probably going to come back around conference play.
Mm-hmm.
And this team looks like, yeah, they haven't really gotten any good wins yet, but it's just a team worth watching as they get into SEC play. They're going to have plenty of opportunities. Auburn, Tennessee, Kentucky. There's going to be plenty of opportunities for them to show us if they're worth that preseason. They were ranked in the preseason, or I can't remember if they were in the first preseason poll or if they came in. But at one point, the week they lost to Georgia Tech and Southern, they were ranked in the AP. And then the last team I want to mention, we just got to give some big kudos to Joe because he talked about this team when we were looking preseason. He mentioned some things that he liked about them. Joe, I know you probably don't have it in front of you, but Utah. Joe mentioned Utah. They've got some big wins over a couple of schools. We don't need to get into it. They did actually play Wake Forest, one of the teams I just talked about, but BYU is their best win of the year. They're currently sitting at 11-2, getting ready to it seems like maybe be a force and possibly compete for a Pac-12 title. Maybe be that second or third team behind Arizona. We'll see. Do you want to guess what their net is at the moment? I'm assuming you probably don't have it in front of you, but we just got to give Joe some props because this is a where Joe, as it appears at the moment, this is a where Joe was right.
We've made some good calls here, made some bad calls. That's how it goes. Utah, I'm trying to. I did see him, and I'm checking the net almost every day. So I want to say the last I saw was like 20. So I don't know, like 20.
It's 16. That's pretty darn good before the start of conference play. So this is one where, again, just we're trying to give the props where they need to be given. Joe mentioned this team, and I was like, I don't know about that. Like I can see something. Joe mentioned Ben Carlson and a couple other players on that team. Was it the Madsen kid or I can't
Hmm.
remember the other guy's name. So, um, unfortunately, some of these games may end up on Pac-12 Network. That's, I guess, the only benefit of what college sports are going to look like next year without the Pac-12 as is maybe we'll get to see more of these games. But so again, it's just a team that you know worth tuning into their games if there's something on. I know Thursday night football is done now. I think right.
Correct.
Starting in week 18, we have no more Thursday night football, so you may see some of these games, come on Thursday night or maybe Monday, Tuesday night. Just these are teams that we're just going to keep an eye on. And again, I know I already said it, but Joe, we I was wrong about St. Mary's, so I got to take the blame for that. But we collectively, as a podcast, from your pick of Utah, we're looking smart.
We'll see if it holds up. I still think they have a long way to go here, but they have a lot of talent. I liked what I saw last year in limited amount of time watching, and then just the research through the offseason, just decided to keep on rolling with it. So, we'll take any free Utah merch to help push forward your chances to make the tournament. That's for sure, and we'll wear it proudly.
And Joe, that this is this Craig Smith's? He's the newer. He came over from
Yeah.
or my Utah. Was it Utah State that he coached at before?
So Utah Valley? Was it Utah Valley?
I can't remember.
No.
I thought it was Utah State before, but so it's just want to point out that's a newer coach. I don't know if this is his second or third year, but he hasn't been there that long. So of course they're going, and Joe, you're going to have to remind me. I can't remember who's joining what, but they're going to the Big 12 with all this conference realignment. Utah is okay.
Yeah.
So it's just a nice team that historically has had a few runs. The Andrew Bogut years where they've had a couple of good teams here and there. So now they're going to be joining the Big 12 eventually. So lots more basketball acumen in that conference, but just a team to watch as we get close to tournament time.
Yeah, it was Utah State. He's been there. This is his third year. So we'll see what they do. See if they can keep up in the Pac-12. As we said, not as notable this year as other years, but we'll keep it moving. Greg, let's have the picks for the week. We have a couple picks here. It's still not the greatest schedule yet, but we'll get into the thick conference schedule here in the next couple weeks. We're going to start off with New Mexico at Colorado State. This one's tonight as we're recording. That's January 2nd. It's going to be a late night game. It's on FS1 at least, so people can watch it. Colorado State's favored by 3.5 at home.
Yeah, this is two one-loss teams going into the game tonight. This is actually a big week for Colorado State. I was looking. I wouldn't have looked if I didn't see our buddy John Rothstein tweet about this, but they actually also have Utah State this weekend. So that means Colorado they're going up against one loss New Mexico and a one loss Utah State team all in 1 week. We've already said it. The Mountain West looks deepish. I don't think they have any legitimate title shot teams or anything like that. But we just saw a Mountain West team go to the Final Four last year in San Diego State. With how weird things are this year, don't be surprised if you look up and there's two Mountain West teams in the Sweet 16 or something like that. So this is a conference worth watching. This game in particular. New Mexico's getting back to being healthy. We kind of mentioned them in the preseason. Joe knows I was kind of high on them. Jamal Mashburn's fun to watch. Jamal Mashburn Jr. Colorado State has Isaiah Stevens. This game is in Fort Collins at Colorado State. I'm gonna pick Colorado State. And Joe already mentioned this is probably a game that wouldn't necessarily be on our radar, but schools are still coming back from break and whatnot. So it's a little bit of a lighter schedule, but as we are right around the corner from the thick of the conference things. So I'm going to pick Colorado State in this game. Big week for them. So if they get 2 wins this week, they're going to be sitting pretty.
Yeah, I will say I'm a little bit disappointed in you for not taking New Mexico. I'm taking New Mexico. There's some concerns here for both sides for me. I mean, I think Isaiah Stevens has had a very good season. He's had some bad games too. They've been able to cover up a little bit. Both these teams have lost to St. Mary's. I would like to formally yell at New Mexico for scheduling the dumbest non-conference schedule of all time. Their tough game at St. Mary's was the only thing of note on their resume. So if they lose 5 games in the Mountain West, they might miss the tournament, and this is one they got to have. So I'm going to say they get the job done. I think Colorado State's had a wild run here for a little bit, and as you said, this is a big week for them. I'll take New Mexico to get the win in this one. Next one up, we have Arizona and Colorado. This one's at Arizona. It is on January 4th. Greg, Arizona's had their struggles. Colorado has some health issues. What are you thinking?
The last I heard, Tristan Da Silva was day to day. I don't know about Cody Williams, but I was high on this Colorado team preseason. Arizona's been, for the most part, good, but it seems like they're maybe on a little bit of a downslope. This game is at Arizona, but I'm gonna take Colorado. You know, there's just some weird results sometimes. I think this team's good enough to do it. I think they might catch Arizona at a time when they're maybe struggling a little bit. So this game, I believe, is Thursday, and I believe it is on ESPN too. So this is one of those games that you now might be able to watch because there's no Thursday night football to kind of take over. So Joe, what are you thinking?
Going to Arizona, you're right about the Pac-12 did make them go to, and this is smart, by the way. It's like a complaint, but they had to play back-to-back road games. They do the Friday Sunday thing. They play Stanford and Cal on the road to get that road trip out of the way. So they lost the back end of that. Not an excuse that they had to play 2 games in 2 games against 2 different schools or whatever. We've talked about they play AU tournaments all the time, but I think this is more of a faith of like I think they're going to figure it out type of thing. They've had a couple days at this point when this game goes on to figure some things out to get back in the lab as they call it. And Caleb Love's been scoring a lot. I would like to see that be more balanced. He's not playing poorly, mind you, but he's doing okay. Have it more balanced. I think they can figure it out. I think their size can definitely help them, and I do think Colorado with their health issues, we don't know who's going to be active or not for this game. So I'll take Arizona. I'm not too confident in it. I think this could be more of a coin flip, but just them being at home and the talent they have on their roster, I will take them. Next one up, we have UConn at Butler. This one is on January 5th. That is Friday. Greg, Butler maybe a little bit better than people expect. And UConn, I mean, still figuring some things out here with some guys coming back from injury and everything. It's and some other guys who are out for injury. So it's definitely an interesting one to pick here.
Yeah, I have this game on here. I don't know, again, if in a normal week I would have, but we kind of heard some murmurs in the preseason. Of course, Thad Matta back at Butler now. Actually, was just talking with some family members this weekend, but Greg Oden is on staff. John Diebler is on staff, and Cincinnati's own Alex Barlow is on staff. So we know like half their staff, which is, I mean, I feel like I know sometimes I look at an assistant coach like, I know who that is, whatever, but it feels weird to like, I can look down their bench and be like, I know who that is. I know who that is. I know who that is. But this is a Butler team that, maybe is the start of something. This game is real. I'm picking UConn, but this is really there because this is your prove it game. This game is at Butler. If you're gonna tell us, if you're gonna announce to the world, hey, we're worth paying attention to. Butler has already played Providence. They lost that game, but it was on the road at Providence. So if you want to compete in the Big East, you're going to have to win your home games. And a win like this would be a good one for them. This will be to kind of tell us like, hey, pay attention to us too. So I'm still picking UConn, but I think it might be a better game than some people think.
I'm going UConn in a rout. I don't think Butler's that good. They have lost pretty much any big chance they've had already this season to kind of prove themselves. They've kind of lost that game. This line is 7 on this one, and that you're right. Like that is kind of the territory where I think it's like, maybe Vegas is figuring out Butler's better than expected, but I think UConn's that good more than anything. I think Butler's just not like I'm not buying this. Like I've seen a lot of Big East accounts say like, watch out for Butler. I'm not buying it yet. I think they have, as you said, they have to prove it to me first. Maybe I'm a seer. I have to see it to believe it type of guy, but I think UConn's too good, even with some of the injury issues they've had. All right, Purdue and Illinois. This one's at Purdue. This one's also Friday night. This is a little bit different with the Terrence Shannon news. Greg, full disclosure, I'll just go ahead and do this real quick. I was going to take Illinois. I'm not taking Illinois anymore, so I'm taking Purdue.
That again. I almost felt weird putting this game on our picks because it's like it's weird because in one way I was like, well, I have to because we got to talk about it, but I was almost like neither of us are gonna. I imagined neither of us were gonna pick Illinois. This would be a surprise. Like this is one of those losses that if Purdue were to lose this game, it might like look fine on a resume, like just because of what Illinois has done so far. But us knowing the background and the context, that would start signaling some alarm bells. Like, hey, that loss on paper might not, or a resume standpoint might not look bad, but we know what was missing from that game. So I'm picking Purdue. This is a game they should win, need to win. It's not like how. And I know people hate throwing out the must win, but like this is one that if Purdue is going to be that team that we said they were going to be preseason, if they're going to be that dog, if they're going to be that Final Four contender, if they're especially without Illinois playing without Terrence Shannon, this is a game they got to win. It's at home. But if all of a sudden you look up and they're losing, there's going to be a lot of anti-Purdue talk all over Twitter.
Yeah. So bad losses happen, but again, with the situation going on, don't know if you're going to want to lose this one. So both have Purdue there. I will say, Greg, I think Purdue's your guards have come along this year. Like there have definitely been moments where they've struggled with pressure still, and that's still concerning. But they're the prohibitive favorite in my mind still to win it all, and I think it just comes down to their growth. And there's going to be bad games still for everyone. So I'm not going to try to overanalyze that right now. When everyone else is having struggles, Purdue is still playing somewhat decently and deserves their credit as well. On Saturday as well, or actually first game on Saturday, we're going to pick North Carolina and Clemson. This one's at Clemson. We've talked a lot about Clemson this year too. Clemson is ranked at 16th overall. This is going to be a big game, Greg. I know Carolina's playing right now as we're talking. Clemson could maybe make their stamp of being a little bit different this year.
Yeah, so we've paid attention to Clemson. We've talked about them a little bit. We said, hey, we've done this song and dance with Brad Brownell before. Outside of the Memphis game, in my opinion, this is their biggest test so far. So show me something. I'm not saying that you got to win this game, but show me you belong, and I'll start believing in you. I'll start saying something other than like, this is just another Brad Brownell Clemson team with an inflated record. They do have a win over Alabama, who again has been up and down this year, but for some reason the net loves them. Bama is fifth in the net. Go figure. I don't know. We'll see how some of this stuff works out. They hung tough with Memphis. That was a loss just a couple of weeks ago. Joe and I both like Memphis, so those are really their two big games. They've got wins at Pitt and a neutral against TCU. I watched the South Carolina game. I do think there's something to this team, but I'm picking Carolina. I think North Carolina is better, but I would just like to see, there's sometimes where you turn on one of these games and you just say, these two teams they're in different leagues. This team doesn't belong on the floor with this team. So I would like to see something out of Clemson, just to give us a little more of, we're talking about already today, give us a little more of that flavor, give us something different. Brad Brownell, show us that you're turning into something else. You're blossoming, whatever you want to say. I guess that word just came to my head because Jared Blossom Games name just popped into my head because of Clemson. I don't know why. But I'm still taking Carolina. So what are you thinking, Joe?
Carolina, I really like how RJ Davis has played this year. Still have Armando Bacot at the interior, and I think that's important because I think Clemson can win games against teams who don't have good interior post presence, but when you have someone like Bacot going against PJ Hall, that's going to neutralize him. PJ Hall's scoring 20.5 points per game this year, 56% shooting. I don't think he's going to be doing that well against North Carolina. So in a game they play earlier this week against Miami, where the inside presence isn't as good as Armando Bacot, maybe they win, and Miami hasn't been exactly what we thought they were going to be, but maybe they win and get a nice solid win under their resume as well. All right, so the last game we will pick this week, we have Ole Miss at Tennessee. This one is on Saturday, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Now, Ole Miss has had a hot start to the year so far. Tennessee has 3 losses, Greg, but they are all pretty understandable at this rate. That's why they're ranked so highly at number 5 in the polls. Ranked matchups, Chris Beard versus Rick Barnes. Should be a lot of fun in this one.
This is another prove-it-to-me game. Ole Miss has had a somewhat light schedule. They do have a very nice win over Memphis. That was a home game. both Joe and I like Memphis. That's a good one on the resume. Currently sits at quad two, especially since it was a home game. But I still, this might be kind of like that Oklahoma effect where I'm like, man, I just didn't think this team was going to be good. So I still have a hard time believing in them. But Chris Beard at the helm, of course, he went through everything last year and now is coaching this team. I don't know. Maybe he really is that good of a coach and is able to you know take something and turn it into greater than the sum of its parts. But I still am picking Tennessee. Both you and I really like that team, especially since we've gotten to see more of Dalton Connect and just all of the parts on that team. There's plenty of pieces. This game is at Tennessee, but I don't want to. I hate being on the fence, and I don't want to say like I wouldn't be surprised if it's a close game, but like I could also see Tennessee. We look up at it's 90-71 and final. That wouldn't surprise me either. So I just yes, Ole Miss has a good one over Memphis, but I still don't quite know what to think of them. They haven't really challenged themselves that much in the non-conference. So this is definitely a game you want to watch because we're gonna learn something either way.
Yeah, I think if it were at Ole Miss, I might switch the pick. But I'm going to go Tennessee. I think, still figuring out how they're kind of mixing this tough defense with their offense. But all the losses are understandable. They've had some health issues to start the season. So Kai Ziegler had to be brought back very slowly. He's getting more and more full health. I would say between Tennessee and Kentucky, if you put a gun to my head and said I had to pick two teams and one of them had to win the SEC, I would say I'd take those two teams. I think Auburn is second in the SEC odds right now, but I really do like Tennessee and Kentucky a lot more than that. I think Ole Miss has some good players. Chris Beard has done a good job, and Matthew Murrell's one to check out, a very good player for them, 17 points per game. But you're right. I think Tennessee can get the win, and Ole Miss, I think we might have to wait till later down the road to kind of prove it. They're just up at 22 in the polls. I think a loss in this one maybe doesn't even drop them from the polls if they played pretty well. So we'll see how it all comes together. Greg, one more thing from me from these Saturday games as we kind of get to the end of the show here. I am taking Utah to beat Arizona on that Saturday night. It's on Pac-12 Network, sleepy 8 p.m. Eastern game, which I guess makes it 6 p.m. Mountain Time game. I picked Arizona to beat Colorado earlier in the week, but I'm going to stick with the Utes there. I don't know what will happen, but what do you think for that one? I'm throwing you on the spot.
Since I had Utah in like my little worth mentioning, I did not necessarily put that game. We're not trying to we don't pick games. Joe and I pick games to pick games with each other. I put these games on here so that we can talk about them. So I didn't put the Utah Arizona game necessarily in one of our picks for the week or whatever. I pick the game's going to be fun and we're going to learn something either way. So do you actually want me to? I would have.
I know his pick. His pick is Arizona, so he's going to be against the Utes, and again, that's very sad. But I just wanted to point out because we talked about Utah earlier, and it is a big game for them to prove them. They've proven themselves against solid teams, right? But to prove themselves against Arizona on the road, even though Arizona's had their struggles, it still means something. So, and then Greg, I'll ask you one more. You had a pretty interesting pick with this Cincinnati BYU game I didn't expect.
So I've gotten to see that team play a couple of times. I think there's more talent there than and maybe it's the bias of I've seen Cincinnati play and I really have only seen BYU play once earlier in the year when they beat San Diego State. I think they have some good players. Joe, for those who aren't watching, Joe is currently looking at we do picks of every top 25 game. BYU is currently in the top 25. So we're not picking that on this podcast, but Joe is mentioning that I have in the BYU UC game this week, I picked Cincinnati. Again, maybe it's just that bias of a team that I've seen more, versus a team that I kind of think, we kind of talked about BYU and Oklahoma, like, they weren't supposed to be good, so maybe they aren't. But I really like Jizzle James, and I'm not just making fun of the name. He can play, and we've already talked about with UC how we talked about in the crosstown shootout how it was confusing how he only played like 20 minutes and he was the team's leading scorer, so maybe he gets utilized more. There's some good players on that team. Unfortunately, I think, to repeat myself, I think if they're back in the American, they're probably a tournament team this year. Don't think so in the Big 12. We'll have to see, but I think this is a game. If they're going to pick somebody off in the Big 12, even a ranked team, I think this is the game they take.
Even on the road, okay. I did see. I love Jizzle James as well. Love the way he plays. I did watch his game against Stetson live last week. I know I mentioned I went to the game. He was awful. Like he had a one good move where he got to the basket, but he was really bad.
You should have told me that
Well,
before I picked them.
Well, I've taken BYU, and I got to take the competitive advantage here. We're playing for high stakes in that pick'em league that we really don't play for anything. But
yeah,
all right.
pride.
Any final thoughts for the week, Greg?
I can't wait for teams to tell us what they are. I'm still waiting for everybody to just tell us what they are so we can sit here and look smart and act like we're analysts that are analyzing and telling you what's happening. But so far, teams just nobody knows what they are yet.
No one does, and it's always a puzzle that can never be figured out because, some teams will lose one game and then win the next by 20 to the same exact team. It's just how it goes. My final thought before I get to a reminder for everyone, East Carolina, we're currently recording this on, Tuesday, January 2nd. They're currently up by 1 on Florida Atlantic. East Carolina is 7-6, so we had a long discussions about Florida Atlantic. So just tune in next week, see how they Florida Atlantic did, and see if they're still doing
that's
okay.
their first American game, is it not?
That's correct.
Because he's okay.
So we're gonna go finish watching these games. So just wanted to update since we talked about Florida Atlantic so much. I mean, the AAC might be a little bit tougher than this USA was for them last year, even though maybe that's counterintuitive after how many teams left the AAC. But final reminder here, just to like and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. It really helps us out as we move along. We'll be back next week to recap this week and then preview the next week of college basketball. For now, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time.